Can you tell us your name and what your role is as it relates to Interview with the Killer?
Yeah, sure. I'm David Scott. I'm the host of Interview with the Killer and one of the co-creators.
One question that a lot of our audience has is, what is it like going into prisons? Specifically, what rules do you have to follow? Some of us were thinking of the scene in Silence of the Lambs where they say, don't hand him any staples and don't give him a pen. Like, do you have? Are there rules like that?
Oh yeah. No, these are very high security facilities. Obviously, they house some of the worst offenders. Truly, the vetting starts weeks and weeks before the interview happens, and ultimately, there'll be background checks. Every piece of equipment is screened on the way in, as are, our persons. It's an intense environment. It's an intense process. It's creepy, it's fascinating. It really feels like you're entering a dark netherworld, but a really interesting one at the same time.
How challenging was it to get those interviews and prepare for them?
Booking the interviews was an interesting process. We started early in the year, reaching out, and our goal was to book offenders of cases that were notable, that we knew would be interesting to our viewers, and that were different from each other. So in this first limited edition series of 5 hours, all the cases are different, and they range from murders for hire to domestic homicides. We even have an honor killing by a father of his teenage girls. And so the first group of offenders who responded positively were what we're calling sort of the appellant types. People who saw in this engagement an opportunity to either audition their next appeal, or simply take the opportunity to deny their crimes.
Sure.
I don't want to spoil anything for the viewers, but most of the offenders that we've interviewed have requested that we not air the interviews, because I think they don't really understand that this was going to be confrontational. This show is ultimately about justice, and we hold their feet to the fire.
Yes. So they had no control over the fact that it's airing, and they agree. So they
Of course,
agreed to it. Yeah.
Right.
So in these episodes, you talk to other people associated with the cases, such as the woman in episode 1 who found the evidence on the SD card.
Yeah.
What is it like talking to those people, and anyone stick out in particular?
Well, she's a really good example. In many of these cases, there are these extraordinary figures that come to the fore. In that case, the case of Brian Stephen Smith, this is the case of a serial killer who was preying on indigenous women in the Anchorage, Alaska area. And one of the chilling things about the case is how close he came to getting away with it. But for the intervention and courage of a woman who was living on the street, who he picked up one night, and who happened to pocket his cell phone and discover the smoking gun evidence in the case, the video of the murder of Kathleen Henry that he himself produced. Without that discovery, he would be on the streets of Anchorage today, still hunting women. So she's an extraordinary figure. This is a woman who was living in a tent in the woods around Anchorage, and who happens upon this pivotal evidence and brings it forward. The entire case is built on that evidence. We had an opportunity to sit down with the offender and with the state's sort of star witness. It was a fascinating process.
At Court TV, getting justice for victims is very important. What was it like to sit face to face with the killers and confront them about what they did?
Yeah, well, this show is ultimately about justice. It really is, and the victims, their families, their proxies play an important role in the show. In all cases, we invite the relatives of the victims to appear and participate, and whether they decide to do so or provide a statement or decline to participate, we honor their wishes, but we pay tribute to the victims nevertheless. Sometimes it's in an elegant tribute crafted with with images and sometimes their own words, like the diary entries of these teenage girls who were murdered by their father in what was ostensibly an honor killing, but there's an incredible twist to that story that I don't want to give away. Or whether it is a grieving relative who comes on to speak on behalf of the family and the victim themselves, and we regard that as central to what we're doing. And in all cases, we confront the offender about the devastating consequences of their crimes on families and communities.
What was the hardest interview to get through? Was there one where you had to stop a lot for any reason?
Yeah, it's hard to say. They're all so different and also interesting. There's kind of a spectrum, from those who deny their crimes and have to be exposed to those who admit their crimes and who reveal themselves in the process of talking about. We interviewed one young man who's now 30 years old, and he's looking back at a just brutal crime that he committed when he was a 17-year-old boy. And it sort of opens a window onto the adolescent mind and all of the things that can go sideways in the teenage brain. It's a young man who murdered both his parents when he was 17 years old, and now at 30 he's looking back, trying to still understand why this idea got sort of trapped in his brain and stayed there until he acted upon it. There's what forensic psychiatrists call catathemia, and it's a condition where the offender believes that the way to resolve internal conflict is through a singular act of violence directed at someone with whom they're closely bonded, in his case, his parents. Tragic case, destroyed the family, divided the family, and sent a 17-year-old boy to prison for the rest of his life.
Speaking of brain development, they say the brain doesn't fully develop till 25, right? Something like that.
That's right, and I think particularly for boys, this is a process that that is fraught. It's extremely rare that a crime like that happens, but yeah, in this case. It's painful and tragic to watch him try to sort of come to terms with what he has done, now that he does have a fully functioning, presumably frontal lobe.
Right. And like you said, some of the people you spoke to, I guess, are resigned. They admit that they're guilty, and then some people are just hoping to get off on appeal, or they just still have some kind of hope. So it's the balancing between the
right. Some of the, in our gambit is to try and get into their minds, no matter why they've come to the table, right, and whether or not they admit their crimes. We're trying to explore the mindset and motivations behind their actions, and what I've found is that even if they're denying their crimes, against the mountain of incriminating evidence, they reveal themselves in the process. Do you know what I mean? Like even through the denials, you can sort of see flashes of their true character, and the absence very often of anything resembling remorse, and those are chilling moments, in these episodes, which are really full of surprises as we occupy the twisted mind of murderers.
We have a couple of questions from our YouTube viewers.
Great.
So we've got @Angela6537 says, "I can't believe you're interviewing Yasir Saeed. What was that like, talking to someone who has absolutely no remorse?"
Yeah, that was especially chilling interview. This is a man who murdered his two teenage daughters, his own teenage daughters. Obviously murder under any circumstances is repugnant, but it is just so impossible to fathom the murder of a child by their own parent. And as you say, he sits there stone cold, no remorse for his own daughters. He sheds not a single tear for them, or for the relatives who he implicated in his 12 years as a fugitive. You know, this is somebody who hid in plain sight in Texas for 12 years after the crime.
That's incredible.
And that couldn't happen without without accomplices, in this case in his family, who made it possible and who are now in federal prison serving long sentences.
Right.
And he doesn't bat an eye for anyone but himself.
Yeah.
And so, in the process of denying his crimes and describing himself as the victim, he reveals himself.
Yeah. Got at NIZADS says, I'm interested in the interview with Saeed because I'm curious about his time on the run, but I don't think he'll be honest. Did he mention anything about his time on the run at all?
That's such a smart question. Such a smart question. And yes, we talked to him about that. One of the things that forensic psychiatrists look for, it's actually one of the boxes on what's called the Hare checklist for psychopathy, a way of sort of measuring an offender on the spectrum of psychopathy, is criminal versatility. Are they able to function as effectively in one criminal context or another, right? So this is a man who carried out this double murder and then immediately went on the run and was able to evade capture for 12 years, which is kind of a remarkable thing. In fact, he was holding up just about 30 miles from where the crime took place, but the FBI was looking for him in Egypt and in the UAE, where he had spent some time. So yeah, it's a really interesting part of this story that this, after this, this brutal murder, he was able to basically disappear, and in fact he was hiding in plain sight for 12 years before being brought to justice. Great question.
That's incredible. We've got at Ann Moore 8696 wants to know if you got any inkling about how the killers are being treated in prison.
Yeah, all over the map, I would say. Some of the facilities that we went to are high security prisons, obviously, but some of them, like for example, there's a prison in Alaska where Denali Bremer, who was convicted of murdering her friend for the promise of money from a man she hardly knew on the internet. She's serving her time at a prison outside of Anchorage that looks like a mountain lodge, and that goes by the nickname Camp Cupcake. And it's interesting how she ended up there after committing such a brutal murder. This is a facility that has a reputation, frankly, for soft time. And when you examine the record, Denali Bremer got a lot of consideration in the sentencing process because she had such a brutal childhood herself, suffered all kinds of neglect and abuse as a child, and her attorneys did a really good job of converting that into something resembling sympathy for the offender. There was at one point a discussion of housing her in federal prison because she was also convicted of child pornography. And the details of that case were almost equally just abhorrent. But in federal prison, she would have access to certain resources that many state prisons don't. So it's not entirely clear to me how she was able to land in a place with a reputation for such soft crime. But for the most part, the conditions that we witnessed were sort of straightforward in what you would expect. And then there are outliers like hers where you kind of scratch your head and wonder. And she comes bopping in Skechers and sunglasses, and you kind of wonder how that happened.
Yeah, wow.